Attention! This makes absolutely no sense. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Zander's Facts.
Hello everybody. Welcome in to the latest edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. I am, of course, the aforementioned Zander. Y'all, we are back, finally. I loved listening to that intro for the first time in a while. It is episode 138 of the Zander's Facts podcast here on Wednesday, June 5th. Thank you so much for tuning in. The podcast is finally back after a little bit of a hiatus that we had there. As I did mention, back in April, the last time this podcast was recorded, and I had my little wellness check update, and then we had our NBA playoffs preview podcast back in April with our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Bill, who, by the way, is making a return to the podcast this week. We are going to get to that and everything else we're going to talk about this week in just a second. But like I mentioned back then, it has been over 3 years now that I have been almost single-handedly, besides some of our amazing guests that have come on the podcast, but pretty much single-handedly, myself, researching for this podcast, recording this podcast, editing this podcast, and sending it out to all the podcast platforms, putting it on social media, promoting, all that stuff. It's pretty much been me doing that for the last over 3 years, every single week, and eventually, with everything else that I have going on in my life, I was just like, I kind of need a little bit of a break, recharge, figure out what the future of Zander's Facts is going to be. And I was doing that for a month and a half, and I do have to say I'm still not sure exactly what the future of Zander's Facts is going to look like. I do know that this week we are going to have a brand new episode of the podcast. Next week we're also going to have a brand new episode of the podcast, but after that, I'm not so sure right now. I'm still ironing out details on, is the podcast going to remain every single week? Is it going to be broken up into every 2 weeks, every month, whatever? Is it going to be different days? Still figuring that out, because ultimately the last thing that I do want to do is cut it off altogether. I still want to be doing Zander's Facts, but at the pace that I was going at for the last 3 years is kind of unsustainable at this point with the resources that I have at my disposal for this podcast and the newsletter, Zander's Weekend Facts, which has been still going out every single week. If you are signed up to get that in your email, you would know. Just a little hint, you can sign up to do that in the link in this episode's description for the Zander's Weekend Facts newsletter. But ultimately, I am still trying to figure out what the future of Zander's Facts is going to be, how this podcast is going to be released in the future. So, I still want to keep doing the podcast. I still want to keep talking about basketball, which we're doing this week. I still want to keep talking about soccer, which we're doing next week. I still want to keep talking about a bunch of things that interest me, like politics, because I don't know if y'all heard there is going to be a big election this year, and there was a little bit of a news drop last week regarding one of the major candidates. I don't know if you heard about that. I'm not going to talk about that too extensively because you've probably heard everything you need to know about that because everybody's been talking about it, how a former president of the United States, Donald John Trump, his name, 45th president, was not just indicted, he's been indicted 4 times now, convicted for the first time on 34 counts related to the hush money payments to the adult film actress, Stormy Daniels, in New York. Payments that were made to make sure that Daniels did not discuss in public the encounter that she had had with Mr. Trump back sometime in the 2000s when they had sexual intercourse, and that had happened right before the 2016 election because obviously Trump didn't want it to come out before the election because, oh my gosh, he could have lost, but he didn't lose that election. But there is an election that he lost, 2020. Of course, he would not say that to you. If you told him that he lost, he would say, no, I won, which doesn't make any sense because if he won, how is he running again in 2024? You can't serve 3 terms. But either way, that happened last week. So now we have the choice in this country of a convicted felon who's old or another old guy who actually may be a secret evil genius. We sadly don't know because apparently he's also very senile, which is interesting to me. I didn't know you could be like decrepit and old and a puppet and Jill Biden and everybody else is holding you up by the strings every day. But you can also be this just total mastermind who totally stole the 2020 election and is doing all these terrible things to ruin our country deliberately. But you also can't remember where you are, or what your name is, or how old you are, or that you're the president, or that you sniff children, or I don't know, whatever they say. It's quite fascinating, the dynamic that a lot of people, including a lot of the media, I would say, is trying to portray of this election. We have Donald Trump, this candidate who was the president over here. He's trying to run again. He tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election because he didn't win that election, but he really thought he did because, how could anybody lose with all the support he has at his big rallies with the people who wear his face on their hats and their shirts. But, it's almost like America's a lot bigger than those however many people who have been so severely brainwashed that they will fall to the end of the earth for a single man who has absolutely no desire to care about any of those people. His policies, which directly contradict the benefit and well-being of a lot of his supporters, but they don't really care because the other side are the extremely evil radical left Democrats who are trying to destroy our freedoms and our country at every turn. So that is one side. Then the other side is an old man. Not a felon, not convicted, not indicted. His son, though, Hunter. Oh, watch out, buddy. But Hunter Biden, I don't think is the president. Although, apparently there are a lot of crimes that Joe Biden has committed. We just haven't gotten to the bottom of that yet. But when we get the other candidate in for next year, president, he's going to uncover everything, even though, the Republicans in the House have been doing their little impeachment inquiry for a while, and nothing's really come up. But, either way, it is kind of interesting how, like I said, the media is kind of portraying this election as Biden's old age is somehow almost equal to Trump being a convicted felon, which is fascinating because it's not like Trump is a spring chicken either. Like, if we're going to talk about gaffes, I don't really need to pull out the gaff reel for Mr. Trump, but
we are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat
it's not like it's all the best versus the best in this election, which we'll probably talk about on hopefully future episodes of this podcast because there is a debate happening this month. Even before we have the big major party conventions later in the summer, we've got a debate between at least Trump and Biden. I don't know if Mr. Brainworm RFK is going to be there, but we'll see. But it should be fascinating. And hopefully, we'll be able to talk about it more in depth on future episodes of this podcast. But this week, the reason we are back, the reason the Zander's Facts podcast has made its triumphant return is because it is early June, and that means every single year, the NBA Finals, the best time of the year for one of our favorite guests on this podcast, our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, our very own Hillbilly. He was on the last episode of this podcast where we previewed the playoffs. He is now going to be on this episode, the next episode of the podcast, here on Wednesday, June 5th, to preview the NBA Finals. We're also going to recap everything that's happened in the playoffs so far, and of course, give you our predictions for who is going to win the finals, which start on Thursday of this week. So you might want to pay close attention. There's a lot of facts on this podcast, so I'm pretty excited about what you are about to be listening to. Let's get to it though. Right now, episode 138 of the podcast, we are previewing the final round of the National Basketball Association's 2023-2024 season with our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst Hillbilly. That is next as the Zander's Facts podcast continues.
Zander's Facts.
Welcome back, everybody. Zander's Facts podcast. We are back, episode 138 in the month of June. June usually means that there is some high-level professional basketball going on. And so there is only one person we could bring back on the podcast to talk about that high-level professional basketball. It is the man who was on our last podcast a month and a half ago, our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly. Hello, Hillbilly. How are you?
I'm great. Great time of year.
Is this your favorite time of year? June, right before the finals start?
It's in the sports calendar, yes. But as far as the climate goes, I'm not looking forward to another hot Virginia summer.
Oh. But with sports, the French Open's going on, of course, but we're talking about basketball, specifically the National Basketball Association, the playoffs. We had our playoffs preview a couple weeks ago, month and a half ago. And since then, a lot has happened. We are going to go through the first 3 rounds of the playoffs that happened just a little bit, just to refresh your memory. And then we're going to break down the matchup of the NBA Finals. This year, it is the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks. The first time these two teams are matching up in the finals. Hillbilly, let's start, though, before we get to that matchup, by talking about the playoffs. Playoffs are pretty exciting until we got to the conference finals. Those were kind of, you knew what was going to happen basically within the first game or so in both of those series. But the first round of the playoffs I thought was pretty exciting. We did have our beloved teams, the Miami Heat, the Milwaukee Bucks. They kind of got tossed around in the first round. They went out quickly. But the New York Knicks, Madison Square Garden, against Joel Embiid, the Philadelphia 76ers. That matchup was really a toss-up for us because the Knicks, they were the second seed in the playoffs, but the 76ers, they had just gotten Embiid back from injury. They were looking hot. We didn't know who was going to win, but the Knicks, they won that in 6 games, I believe. They closed that series out in Philly. And then also in the East, the Pacers were the team to beat Hillbilly's Bucks. They looked ready to shoot anybody out of the building. So let's start in the Eastern Conference, Hillbilly. You had Boston easily get through Miami, a Jimmy Butler-less Miami, we have to say. And Eric Spoelstra still got a game out of Miami. They won in Boston somehow, some way. But the Knicks had a competitive series with the Sixers. Pacers, not so much with your Bucks. Would you like to reminisce on your favorite Giannis and everything wrong that happened with Milwaukee? It was kind of a disaster.
I don't remember Giannis playing much in the playoffs, so I think that had a lot to do with it. Yeah, I mean, it stunk. We kind of knew it was happening. The Pacers were good against the Bucks even when Giannis was playing. They just seemed to kind of have their number earlier in the year, and no Giannis, no chance. And to be completely honest, I didn't even watch a good bit of it because it was obvious what was going to happen, and I just didn't want to see it. So
what a shame. How about a more competitive series, though? The Knicks and the Sixers. This was kind of the series of the first round in the Eastern Conference. Even though the Cavs and the Magic, who I didn't even mention, went to 7 games, it kind of...
Yeah, that was a good series. That was a really good series, the Cavs and Magic. The Magic looked good. The Knicks Sixers was great to watch, too. I mean, Embiid was kind of there. They just seemed like they were missing something. You had Embiid and you had Maxey doing what they're supposed to do. Tobias Harris did his normal disappearing act where, you couldn't really tell if he was playing or not. But, it's going to be an interesting summer for the Sixers because they've got a lot of opportunity to bring in a big player. And there's a lot of talk that player might be Paul George. And it would basically be subbing in Paul George for Tobias Harris, which, that would be pretty interesting next year if that's what happened and everybody could stay healthy. But once again, Embiid just wasn't really fully healthy for the playoffs, and it's a shame to see it. But then that led to the real story of the early playoffs, which was Jalen Brunson just absolutely killing it for the Knicks. It seemed like he was getting a 40-point game more often than he wasn't, until they finally just ran out of gas. But, that was a lot of fun to watch that series.
Yeah, the Knicks kind of took over the storylines in the first couple of rounds there, including against the Sixers. How about that? Playoff P to the Sixers. Wow.
I'm just saying there's a lot of talk about it, but
we'll see. The free agency, the NBA calendar never stops. Like, Hillbilly's following this 24/7 because you got free agency next month too. So, even when there's not basketball on, there's still stuff to talk about. In the West, though, for the first round, Chillboy, the Minnesota Timberwolves, they came out hungry. They were howling. They swept the Suns. They didn't just beat the Suns. They swept the top-heavy Suns, who have Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. The Lakers were kind of bounced easily. Poor LeBron. By the defending champs, Chillboy's like, no poor LeBron. And the Pelicans went on their way to Galveston after getting swept by the Thunder, who are the youngest number 1 seed in the history of the NBA.
I think the Thunder are also the youngest team to win a series in the NBA.
How about that? Well, let's just start with the Thunder. The Pelicans quit. Charles Barkley was right. They basically quit in the last 2 games of that series, basically. But they were still pretty impressive. They did not lose a game in that first round.
Yeah, no, the Thunder looked really good in the first round. They took care of business, and the Pelicans did kind of. Brandon Ingram just really didn't show up, and Zion. I think the Pelicans could be better next year. I'm hoping for good things, but they were outmatched by the Thunder, and the Thunder did what they should do as a number 1 seed and swept them.
Then the Timberwolves also got a big sweep over the Suns. Both of us did pick the Timberwolves, so props to us, but I don't think I saw a sweep coming. That was pretty...
Yeah, I can't remember what we said, but I think we were both pretty bullish on the Wolves and pretty skeptical of the Suns, and it turned out that the Suns, there was good reason to be skeptical of them. They just really couldn't manage anything. I mean, at least their closing game, I forget what the score was, but by Suns standards, it was actually relative. Yeah, it was 122 to 116. Usually the Suns lose their closeout game in the playoffs by like 50 points for the last 2 years.
Oh.
So that was a bit of an improvement. But yeah, the Suns, man, they're in tough shape for next year. But yeah, Minnesota looked really good. They looked like they were totally in control.
I don't know what you're talking. They have a fresh start. Mike Budenholzer is their new coach. That is an NBA champion. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, maybe Bradley Beal will, remember how to play, and maybe, Kevin Durant will become a team player, and we'll see.
That would just be great. And then the Mavericks, I had the Clippers out of that series. You had the Mavericks, so I guess I have to give the props to you there. If Kawhi was healthy, maybe it would have been a closer series at least, but again, we couldn't.
Yeah, I remember thinking at the time that if Kawhi had been healthy, they would have won. But now I don't think that's the case after what we've seen from the Mavericks.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot more about the Mavericks on this playoffs. To the next round, though, the conference semifinals in the East. Again, it was pretty easy for the Celtics. They beat the Cavs in 5 games, just like they did Miami. The Pacers and the Knicks, though, that was the series of the conference semifinals in the East, at least. There was the Game 7 in New York. I thought New York was going to win that game, obviously, because they're in Madison Square Garden. And I don't think the Pacers trailed at all. Maybe they trailed in like the first minute of the game, but they basically dominated from start to finish in that Game 7.
Yeah, they did, but I think the Knicks had basically just run out of gas. They had run out of people to play. They were without so many of their players. Then Jalen Brunson was beat up, and it was a really tough one for them. You could kind of see it that it was going to happen as they were running out of gas.
Yeah, he got injured in that game, I'm pretty sure, and he
did.
Like
he played less than 30 minutes, I think. And OG Anunoby wasn't, or if he did play, it was really quick. And that's on top of injuries that they already had. And it's just, it was a good year for the Knicks. If I was a Knicks fan, I would be happy with it. They showed a lot of progress. Jalen Brunson, just one of the most amazing players of the playoffs so far.
Yeah, because now you're excited for next year.
Yeah.
And realistically, you couldn't really say that about the Knicks a lot in recent memory, at least.
No, not since the 90s, really.
Yeah. And then in the West, the series in the West, the Nuggets, the defending champions, Hillbillies picked to win the title, and the Timberwolves, who also went to a Game 7, which wasn't looking like it was going to be as close as the Pacers and the Knicks. It was a 20-point game in the third quarter for the Nuggets, and then somehow Minnesota on the road comes back and beats the defending champs at home. And that at that point, Hillbilly, you're kind of like, okay, maybe the Timberwolves are for real. I mean, that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, you have to give them credit for that. It was not a pretty game, and I know this is going to sound, because I'm obviously a very big Jokic fan. I know this is going to sound like sour grapes. I did not like the way that series was officiated. I just thought they let both teams. I just thought they let both teams get away with so much contact that we wound up having these really ugly games. Like the game 7, the closeout game was 98-90, which is like a score from the 90s. The game before that, Denver only scored 70 points, which was part Denver falling apart. But another part of it was that, they were just getting hammered constantly. And Minnesota is a team that is more built for that kind of game than Denver is. Denver's more for a hands-off finesse type game. But, you do have to give Minnesota a lot of credit. You have to give the general manager, who took so much crap for picking up Rudy Gobert. You have to give him from everybody. But, it turns out he was right. Like, it was a good move. He made it all the way to the conference finals with the best player being 22 years old. That's pretty remarkable.
And then the Mavericks, they got over Kawhi and playoff P, the Clippers, to knock out the Thunder in that game 6, because you were kind of worried if it went to a game 7 in Oklahoma City, can the Mavericks really pull it off? Oklahoma City at home was really good, but
they did. I mean, they couldn't have been closer. I mean, they won by 1 point in that last game, and I think that if it had gone back to game 7, it would have been really close. I think Oklahoma City's given Dallas their best challenge so far. And I think Oklahoma City, despite the fact that obviously as a number 1 seed, you want to make it to the conference finals, given what we know about Dallas now, I thought they acquitted themselves pretty well. I mean, they did a better job than the Timberwolves. So. And they've obviously got everything to look forward to. Oklahoma City does.
And, I don't have as big an issue with them now as I did, because I haven't seen the Shea and Chet commercial in weeks. I mean, it's been incredible. I haven't had to hear that crap anymore.
What a pro wants, what a pro needs.
Yeah, they've got the off season to work on that.
They can make a new commercial.
Hopefully we'll get because I guess they just figured that, Helmgren is just so telegenic that you have to get him on a camera, with those matinee idol good looks. Beautiful. So yeah, hopefully we won't have to see any more of that.
I don't know what you're talking about. I thought the Timberwolves gave them a great series in the conference finals. Probably not. It was a 5-game series. It was not a sweep. The Mavericks said, you know what, we'll give you a game. Gentleman's sweep. They were very nice about it. But that last game, too, it was in Minnesota, I'm pretty sure, that game 5, and Dallas kind of blew the doors off of them pretty quickly. I think that TNT broadcast quickly pivoted to who's going to win this game to, all right, how is Dallas and Boston going to be in the finals? Because it was very impressive.
Yeah, by halftime, they had completely given up. I mean, Luka came out just absolutely sizzling, knocking back 30-foot jumper after 30-foot jumper in that first quarter, and just looked absolutely unstoppable. I mean, it just, it reminded you of some of the very best players to ever play the game. The way that you could take one look at Luka and see that they're not going to lose. There was no way it was going to happen. And there are just some players that are that good that when they are on their game, nothing can stop it. And he just looks like he is that kind of player now.
I mean, you can back that up statistically. Some of the facts I'm going to throw at you later, it's like Luka has been incredible in the playoffs. The other conference finals, though, it was even less competitive, actually. The Celtics and the Pacers. That was not even a gentleman's sweep. That was just a sweep. Boston beat Indiana. Yeah. They came back, actually, in 3 of those games they were down to come back and beat Indiana. So it was pretty impressive the way that Boston actually won that series, because I had the privilege with you, Hillbilly, of actually watching a couple games live in person, which we rarely get the opportunity to do. I was like, oh, I'm going to get some Hillbilly knowledge while watching these games, and I did. But one of the things we talked about was that Boston, in the Miami series and in the Cavs series, they basically just blew at least one game in those series. It was one game in those series, and that's what we thought they were going to do against Indiana, and they didn't. They came back in clutch time, and they won 4 of those games in a row.
They did, but Indiana played very well, especially considering their star player Halliburton missed the last game altogether, but he was obviously still bugged by that hamstring issue that he had the second half of the season. And they did really well. I think there was only one game that was decided by more than 10 points. All the other games were like 3 points or 5 points. They were all close. And that last game, like I said, Halliburton didn't even play. And they still really put up a good fight.
Yeah. And that shows you something that we haven't seen from Boston in previous years, because Boston's always been here in the Eastern Conference Finals, that in the clutch time, they might be a little better than they have been in past years. But now, Hillbilly, we have made it to the final round of the 2024 postseason, the NBA Finals, a series which is going to feature the third pick from both the 2016, the 2017, and the 2018 drafts. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic, all of whom are the leading scorers out of their draft classes, by the way. And it's also a matchup of the two teams who had the best records after the All-Star break this season. So you could probably, definitively say these are the two best teams at the end of the season, and it hasn't been that way just in the playoffs, back to the regular season too, because Dallas was getting hot even before the playoffs started. That's kind of how they got here. So let's talk about the NBA Finals. Let's preview this matchup, talk about the teams, and of course we're going to make our fact-filled predictions. If y'all don't remember, I already made a prediction back in April. It's still alive, so I'll make another one just in case. Let's go. Let's talk, Hillbilly, first about the Celtics, the Eastern Conference champion. They won 64 games this year. That is the most by any Eastern Conference team since Miami in 2013. That was when LeBron James was on their team. And it's actually interesting in the East because last year we had the Heat in the finals. They were the 8th seed, and now we've got the 1 seed in the East. The Celtics are back in the finals for the second time in 3 years. But if you go back to the 2017 season, they have only missed the Eastern Conference Finals twice. They are 6 for 8 on making the conference finals, including 3 straight. Like, they're not just some upstart team. They've been doing this for a while with their key guys.
Yeah, they really have. I mean, Jason Tatum is going to wind up having a career when he looks back on it that's going to be astonishing. I mean, he goes to the conference finals. What has he been every year but one?
2, I guess. 2, yeah.
Which is just incredible. I mean, you naturally feel like he's older than he is, but I think he's just 26 years old, which, given, with his resume, that's really something. But with that has come a lot of high profile losing, because everybody's watching in the playoffs, and the Celtics, haven't gone all the way, but they've always been on the TV, because they've always made it pretty far. So I think that's kind of added to Tatum's reputation a little bit there.
Yeah, Tatum and Brown we've both been there for a while. As I said, those 2016, 17, 18 drafts. There have been the star-studded duo once again. Both of them have averaged at least 25 points per game in the postseason. This year's squad with the Celtics, it carries this dominant 1-2 punch, though, the likes of which we have rarely seen in professional basketball, because you've got the offense, Hillbilly, that is statistically the best we have ever seen, actually. They put up the best offensive efficiency number in NBA history this year in the regular season, 122.2, which means that they scored 122.2 points per 100 possessions this season. The last time the team with the best regular season offense won the title, though, was the 2017 Warriors. So that does not mean that you have the best offense in the league, you're going to win the title. But that is the best number we have ever seen on offense. And a large part of that was three-point shooting. The NBA averaged 12.8 three-pointers per game this season made 3-pointers, which was the most ever. And the Celtics had the most in the league. They had 16.5 per game. They also led the league on attempting 42.5 threes per game. And their opponent, by the way, is not too far behind. But it kind of carried the Celtics this year, Hillbilly. When they were off, the rare nights they were off from 3-point, they looked vulnerable. But when they were on, they looked unbeatable at times.
Yeah, they were very consistent. They were very solid because they don't have a lot of holes on their roster. I mean, their depth is a little suspect, but their top 6 players are as, even as any top 6 players are going to be. They don't really have like a starter or anybody that doesn't really belong out there. And they just look like they're ready to go. But, we haven't really seen the Celtics do anything in the playoffs yet this year. And just because they've had such an incredibly easy road. So I still have some serious hesitation with the Celtics, and Porzingis has not played yet in the playoffs, and he's still not back from what I understand. He's still progressing. And without Porzingis, I don't know. I think the Celtics could have some trouble.
Yeah, they have a 9-day rest in between their last game against the Pacers and Thursday, which is the first game of the finals. So they've got a bunch of time to get those players healthy, but Porzingis, as you said, only played 4 games in the postseason, and those were in the first round. He hasn't come back from injury yet, and he was a key contributor to their team this season. Al Horford's, of course, slotted in pretty nicely.
Well, I was going to say, he's also 38 years old. I mean, that's going to be tough going up against somebody like Derek Lively, who's just jumping out of the gym.
And then the other part of that 1-2 punch I mentioned was the defense. It wasn't just the offense. Boston had the best offense statistically this year. Their defense was a measly number 2. They had a 110.5 defensive rating, which was only above the Timberwolves. Timberwolves defense, of course, we just saw what happened against the team that Boston is about to play. Or Dallas kind of threw a blowtorch at it. But the Celtics, they've played in 81 postseason basketball games in the last 5 years. That is the most in NBA history for a team that hadn't won the championship in that span. Could this be the run to put banner number 18 up into the rafters of the Garden in Boston? We'll see. They were here, 2 years ago, Hillbilly, against the Warriors. Yep. And that was the last time in recent memory, because the only title they've won since 1986 was 2008, and that was with a totally different group. Right. So when you're talking about finals experience, maybe not that much. They've been here. They were here just 2 years ago. But for a team as historic as Boston is, 17 titles is tied for the most all time. Recently, they haven't been that successful. Of course, as we said, they've been to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 of the last 8 years. So they've been right there. But can they make that next jump? That's the big question I think we all have for Boston as we await this series.
2 years ago, it was very different. Everybody was younger, obviously by 2 years. I guess that was an obvious thing to say.
Oh.
But, I mean, they were in different periods of their career, like categorically. Like, Tatum was 24 years old. That's really, really young to be the best player on a team that wins the finals. And, as I recall, and I think if you looked back in the archives of Zander's Facts, it was a pretty easy call to make that Golden State was going to beat them. And a lot of that was because the Celtics had a really difficult postseason. I mean, you remember that postseason with Miami and it coming down to the very end there. Mm-hmm. It's just really, it was a really tough one. I thought it had taken everything out of Boston. Their guys were playing insane minutes. They were turning the ball over like crazy because they were so tired. This could not be any more different this year. Boston did not get challenged once in the playoffs. In the first round, they play a Jimmy Butler-less Heat, and a Heat that had not looked good all year long. And then you take away their heart and soul and their best player in Jimmy Butler, they didn't have a chance. then they go up against the Cavs, and the Cavs don't have their best player for the second half of the series in Donovan Mitchell, and they didn't have Jared Allen, who was an all-star level player, the entire series. And then they move on to Indiana, and Indiana, first of all, doesn't really belong in the conference finals with that roster. They just happened to get in there because Boston also had the good fortune of not having to face the Bucks because Giannis was hurt. Embiid was coming off of an injury. Everything just kind of rolled for Boston to get it. I was trying to think through this, and I was looking back on it. I don't think there's ever been an easier path for someone to make the NBA Finals. I mean, they literally had no resistance throughout the whole thing. And that's not their fault. I mean, that's just what was in front of them. And they did have an incredibly good regular season. But I just don't think that they really answered any questions. And we'll see, though. Did all that rest, is that going to help them do better than they did last time where they came in exhausted? Or are they not going to be playing at the level that Dallas is right now, because Dallas is just coming off of just playing some of the most amazing basketball we've seen in a while?
We'll see. These are the two hottest teams in the NBA, Celtics and the Mavericks. The Mavericks haven't had the good fortune of all the injuries, again, for the opposition that the Celtics have had. But now let's talk about the Dallas Mavericks, Hillbilly. They beat the Clippers, they beat the Thunder, they beat the Timberwolves. They were probably most impressive in that Timberwolves series because they smacked them around basically there at the end. Listen, last year at this time, we were talking about the Mavericks as a laughingstock, right? Because they didn't even make the playoffs. They tanked.
Intentionally. Yeah.
Yeah, intentionally tanked to get out of the playoffs. And now look who's laughing now, because now they're in the finals. They got hot at exactly the right time at the end of the regular season, and they crushed all the adversaries they had in the West to advance to their third NBA Finals in franchise history. The first, by the way, where they are not facing Dwayne Wade or the Miami Heat.
Yeah, I guess that's true, isn't it?
2006 and 2011, both of those were against Miami. They won that second one with Dirk, but not the first one. But Jason Kidd, who's their coach, was a player on that 2011 Mavericks title run.
Yeah, and now he's doing an awesome job coaching them up, because I don't know about you, but that journey that Dallas just took through the playoffs is one of the more amazing things I've seen in a while. Just coming from, where they were, being the fifth seed coming in and, having all the questions they had, but then to watch them. I mean, the Clippers are a good team. Like, I know they didn't have Kawhi Leonard, but they still have a ton of talent. For a first round opponent, that is no gimme. And then from there, it just gets crazy hard. They have Oklahoma City, which I think Oklahoma City is still one of the best teams in the playoffs. They only lost early because they had to face Dallas early. And then, in Minnesota, that just got done beating Denver, they just dismantled Minnesota. Towards the end there, it was a foregone conclusion. I remember when we were watching some of the games, I remember saying, like, I never had the feeling that Dallas was going to lose any of those games. Like, I just always figured it seemed like they were going to win every single one of them, especially the last one, obviously.
Well,
where Luka
first minute,
was
you knew that.
Just in control. It was just a lot of fun to watch it. And Luka he's got that. We talked about it a couple of years ago on the podcast where it's, I was saying that it just seemed like it was a matter of time until Luka just took over. Like, he just needed the right team around him. And that just seems like what's happening. It seems like he can just completely take the game over.
He's got the supporting cast he needs now. But let's just focus on Luka for a second, because the numbers I've got are pretty incredible. He averaged 33.9, almost 34 points a game this season. That was the most in the NBA. He was only behind Steph Curry for most three-pointers made this year. I would say that's pretty good. He's the first scoring leader to play in the finals since Curry in 2016, but he is looking to become the first scoring champ to win the title since Dr. Shaquille O'Neal for the Lakers in the year 2000. and he scored at least 28 points in all 5 games of the conference finals, including the one they lost. He didn't take a night off in that conference finals. And the one thing that really amazed me was this stat right here. He is the first player in NBA history to, in a single postseason, record at least 450 points, 150 rebounds, 150 assists, and make 50 three-pointers. And we still have a series to go, Hillbilly. I mean, he's incredible. And when you watch him too, and I think you mentioned this at the beginning, that game 5 against Minnesota, the way he is just launching those threes and it looks effortless. Steph back in the day when he would just, go crazy. We are watching one of the best players in the NBA right now. Probably the best player that's left in the finals, I would say.
I think there's no question that he's the best player left. I mean, a lot of respect for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but they're not in that category of the Giannis's, the Jokic, the Doncic, or even like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They're the next step below that, but they're not in the category of Doncic.
I mean, he's really been incredible. And then, like you said, the team that they have placed around him, what was it? A couple years ago, they did lose Jalen Brunson, and what did they get for him?
Nothing?
Nothing. Kristaps Porzingis, they lost for nothing. But the way that roster has come together, Kyrie Irving was a big risk. If you remember a year or two ago, we were talking about him, and we weren't talking about basketball. We were talking about all the other stuff he was doing. But that's all gone. He hasn't talked about COVID or I forget all the other stuff or what he was doing.
He's been nothing but a model citizen all year long. He is playing. I never, to me, this is the biggest redemption story in sports that I can remember. Like, I could not stand watching him play, and now I'm loving watching him this year. He looks like he's having a really good time out there. He's not sulking, and he's just, this amazing handle that he has and this ability to finish. I don't know. Him and Doncic are just really fantastic. I know Stan Van Gundy was, very happy to say that he thinks they're the best offensive guard duo in NBA history.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that still goes to Clay and Steph Curry, but I see the point he's making. I mean, they're really good together.
And with Kyrie, you don't just have the on-court play; you have the storyline too of him going back to Boston, because he had that little time in Boston after he left Cleveland when he won that title in 2016. Played for a little bit more with LeBron and was like, "All right, I'm done. I'm going to go to Boston." And that didn't leave on such great terms.
No,
and
I remember
that was even before all the stuff blew up.
Yeah, Bill Simmons saying that he would drive him to the airport because they had just had it with him. I mean, he hated being there. It was awful. And, it's got to just kill Boston fans to see this. And if Dallas wins and Kyrie has great games, it's just going to kill them. The fact that he's actually just really good for the team now, and they're just wondering, like, where was that when we needed it? And then now I think just today, Kyrie even has gone out to say that he's not proud of what he did in Boston. Like, I can't believe that we would hear those words from Kyrie Irving.
Wow.
What
a guy.
And that's got to stick it in Boston even more. And I think that Kyrie is doing that on purpose. Like, I think he has realized that the way to really, really get his revenge on Boston fans is to just become the absolute ultimate team player and then beat them with that.
I can't wait. I can't wait for what they're going to say to him on Thursday night, game 1 in Boston.
Yeah.
Crowd might get a little nasty. They're known for that in Boston.
I mean, it's not just Kyrie. I mean, like, LeBron James has said he would never play in Boston. It's
not just Kyrie. They're known for that. I mean, This is going on decades and decades. But the other players, not just Kyrie, that the Mavericks have, Hillbilly. I mean, you've got guys like Derrick Jones Jr., Derek Lively, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, specifically inside Gafford and Lively. Gafford's 30 blocks are the most of any player in the playoffs. And Lively, the rookie from Duke, is shooting 66% from the floor in the playoffs, and I don't think he missed a single shot from the field in the Western Conference Finals.
100% field goal percentage. And I think he probably averaged like at least 8 or 9 points a game. So it's not like he just was never shooting. He just, he was really something else. And remember with Lively, we talked earlier about the embarrassing, and how they tanked last year. Well, when they tanked, the direct result of that tank is Derek Lively. They would not have had him if they had not tanked. And it just seems weird that the basketball gods are letting that happen, that you're going to be rewarded for that kind of, behavior. But, they really did only tank at the very end. They didn't tank the whole season. So, it seemed to be the smart move, and it certainly seems to have paid off because, Lively looks great. Gafford looks great. They had a great trade deadline this year, picking up PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, which is just exactly what they needed. Now they have these two super athletic, super long centers that they can throw at you. So they will always have rim protection out there. And the lob game between Luka and Lively, and sometimes Gafford too, is so much fun to watch. And it's terrifying for the other teams because when Doncic gets in the lane, the center has to come up on it, because Doncic's floater game is so good that the center just has to come up. And that lob, if you've got a decent lob threat there, Luka has all the ability in the world to take advantage of it every time. And when you give Luka someone like Derek Lively, who's 7'1" and can jump out of the gym, we're seeing what's happening with that. And, as you said, since the trade deadline, they had been reeling it off. And, you look at it, I think it's since March 5th, they're 16-2. And the two losses were to Oklahoma City and Golden State, both on the road. Other than that, they won every single game until the very end when they had nothing to play for. I think they lost to Detroit and one other team, but they weren't playing for anything anymore. Mm-hmm. So they were just absolutely torching it towards the end. And it's funny, we talked about this in the playoff preview, that the after or the post deadline success has not really been equating to playoff success recently, but this year it obviously has.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like in the NCAA tournament, when I do my bracket reveal and in the playoffs, I always try to look for the trends over the past years. And one of those trends, obviously, you'll look at is success after the All-Star break in the last half of the season. And it hasn't really been there recently. This year, though, these were the two hottest teams. These two teams had the two best records at the end of the regular season. What could have been, Hillbilly? Daniel Gafford, Kristaps Porzingis. These are Wizards players.
Yeah. Well, they got rid of them, so that's good.
And now those two guys are very happy they did.
And they traded him for guys like Jordan Poole, who's probably, when you factor in production, salary cost, and lost opportunity for other players who don't get to shoot because of Jordan Poole, probably the worst player in the NBA.
Amazing. So Dallas, like I mentioned earlier, Boston's offense, historically great. Their defense, amazing. Dallas's offense and defensive numbers haven't been that great, but with 3-point shooting, Boston again was number one, but Dallas was third. They were 14. They made 14.6 threes per game. They were second with attempts, 39.5. So that kind of tells you how the series might go. But something that could keep Dallas in this series, however, because they are not going to have as many games at home as they are on the road, is their performances on the road, because they actually have a better winning percentage on the road in the postseason than at home. They went 7-2 on the road this year. They won all the road games in the Western Conference Finals, and they went 5-3 at home. That's nothing to sneeze at, but 7-2 on the road. Oklahoma City, that's a pretty good environment. I like how they wear, like in Oklahoma City, they all wear the same color. They all wear like white or blue, everybody in the crowd. I like that.
No, it's those, a lot of those smaller market teams are really developing more like college atmospheres. I mean, they're not, Minnesota's crowd was good. That wasn't the problem.
No.
But, a lot of them are doing that. And Oklahoma City's, maybe the best at it. It doesn't seem like there is a fan for the other team in the entire stadium.
And that's what you like. I remember when LeBron was playing for Miami and everybody would wear white. They were the white hot heat. Now they don't do that, They need to do that more. The Clippers are going to have the wall, though. Did you see that? The wall at their new arena that's coming out in the
No.
next year. It's going to be like a student section for the NBA.
Oh, okay. Well, that could be cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but you know how it works in college because the students, can walk over from their dorms to the game. In the end, well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. We're not talking about
but if you just have younger players, or I'm sorry, younger fans, like in a big part of the section, where the cameras are, like in the lower part of the bowl. I mean, they get a little louder, a little rowdier. It might be more fun.
Yeah, that's definitely what they're trying. I mean, they've been sharing Staples Center with the Lakers for however many years it's been open, basically, and they've always been second fiddle to the Lakers because the Lakers are the Lakers and the Clippers have never won anything, So they're trying something out, which I can't blame them for. But either way, we're not talking about the Clippers. The Mavericks, the Rockets, hold the record for most road wins in a postseason with 9 in 1995. That was the year they won the finals, Hillbilly, because Jordan went to play baseball, and the Mavericks would become just the second team that is seeded 5th or lower to win the finals, joining that Rockets squad from 1995. And they are the 6th team. Actually, this is a fun stat I found. They're the 6th team to make it to the finals, seeded or lower. All 6 have had to face the top seed from the opposing conference. It happened last year. Miami was the 8th seed. They faced Denver, was the 1 seed. So I just found that interesting how always the lower seeds face the number 1 seed in the other conference. Those are the 2 teams, Dallas and Boston, but specifically, Hillbilly, this matchup. As I kind of alluded to earlier, these are the teams that attempted the most threes in the league this season, but Luka Doncic, he can't only shoot threes. He can basically do anything, and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I remember in the playoff preview, we talked about clutch time. That's specifically what it's called by the NBA. Clutch time is like in the last 4 minutes when the game is within 5 points or something like that.
Right.
And how recently, especially at the last possession of the game, last couple of years, when the Celtics have the ball, Jason Tatum just dribbles and hoists like this terrible 3 with a second to go. And they
contested 3.
Yeah, contested 3, and nothing happens. And you said this year it's been a little better.
Yeah.
They have been in close games against Indiana, a Tyrese Halliburton-less Indiana for some of those games, but they won those games. They have been better in clutch time, and I'm pretty sure that a bunch of these games are going to be close the way that these 2 teams have been playing. What are you specifically looking at when the Mavericks and the Celtics match up in the series?
Yeah, well, I think what we're looking for here is, is Doncic really the kind of player that is just, can take over a series no matter who he's playing? Like somebody that's on the level of like, the Magics, the Jordans, the Birds, whoever it is, where there's just nothing you can do to stop him, or is the better overall team going to win? Boston has so few problems on their team. Everybody plays very good defense on Boston. Porzingis' rim protection, which used to be a problem, has now made Boston one of the best rim protecting teams in the league. Everybody plays good defense, and everybody can shoot the 3 very, very well, which is something that Dallas doesn't really boast. They've got centers that, Lively is not going to make a lot of threes for you. So, it's going to be interesting to see if Doncic can just kind of carry that team itself. Watching Kyrie come back, who they're going to put on Kyrie. Kyrie was, all these games where Doncic was scoring like 35, 36 points, Kyrie was scoring the same number of points in a lot of those games. And it was just this 1-2 punch where they could trade off. that just, was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, Kyrie scored, I believe it was 36 in that closeout game 5 Minnesota. It wasn't just Doncic in that last a game against the Timberwolves. It was Irving too, who's been, as you mentioned earlier, super fun to watch now. Even putting aside everything else, like even if you just watch the man play basketball and his handles,
he's really good at it. I mean, it just makes you wonder because, him and Steph Curry are like maybe the two best players that size that I can remember. Isaiah Thomas too, from back in the day. And it's really cool to watch them when they're on their game, when they're so much smaller than everybody else out there and still capable of just taking it over.
Gotta help we love the little guy. Gotta help the little guy,
Yeah.
Of course. So, Hillbilly, we have made it to the part of the podcast where everybody is eagerly anticipating our picks for this series, the 2024 NBA Finals, the Dallas Mavericks, the Boston Celtics, because you are the guest. I mean, you're not really the guest anymore. You're basically on this podcast all the time now. But I'll leave it to you to make your prediction first in the series.
Well, it's tough because Boston obviously did come off of a historic season. I do have some lingering doubts with Boston, though. I have lingering doubts about Jason Tatum stepping up and being the kind of guy that can really take over a series. I know their record was incredible, but it was also a record against the East, or they had to play the East twice as much as they played the West. And the East was just not very good this year, because of injuries and whatever else, compared to the West, which was a murderer's row. 1 to 10, in the playoffs. You've got teams like the Lakers, at the very bottom there.
The Warriors, who didn't make
the Warriors, with Steph Curry, compared to the East, it's just not as competitive. When Boston did play the best teams in the West, the three best teams in the West being, in no particular order, Minnesota, Denver, and OKC, and they wound up tied at the end. They were head and shoulders above any team in the East. And against those three teams, Boston had a losing record this year. It's not Boston's fault, but we haven't really seen what they're going to do in the playoffs. How this kind of super 3-point heavy approach that they take, how that's really going to work in the playoffs. And we'll find out. But, at the end of the day, I am always tempted to go with the best player. And especially when the best player is just as incredibly hot as Luka is right now. And, it's not a new thing. Luka has been in the league for 6 years. He's been an all-NBA first team, meaning he has been one of the 5 best players in the NBA 5 of those years, which is insane. I don't know if that's ever happened before. 5 of his 6 years, he's one of the 5 best players in the NBA. Every year, he's in the MVP conversation. And now that he has this team around him that looks like it's built to play with him, I'm not going to bet against that. You couple that with Porzingis' lingering injury, and we just don't know if he's going to come back or not. And I guess he probably will, but what will he look like? He's already pretty slow. If he's even slower than that, he's going to become a massive liability for him defensively. And that means I got to play Horford a ton, which, he's 38 years old. So all that put together, I'm gonna go with Dallas. I'm gonna stick with my pick at the beginning and go with Dallas.
Oh, well, you picked Denver at the beginning.
Well, I should have picked Dallas. That's what I meant to say.
I'm sure. How many games do you think that series is going?
I think it'll go 7.
Close game. So you've got Dallas winning a game 7 in Boston.
That's what Dallas does. Luka feeds off of negative energy.
They do.
Remember what happened in Minnesota with the guy that brought the handkerchief, and said, you're a crybaby or whatever. And Luka just saw that and is like, that's the guy. That's the guy that I'm going to kill tonight. And they catch him saying, who's crying now, MFer, except I don't think he used the acronym.
No.
But, he's the kind of guy that, like, again, it just reminds me of the way that Jordan was. Like, when he gets that steel edge to him, he just can't be stopped. And if any crowd is going to think that they're the ones that can get over that, it's Boston.
Oh, yeah.
They think, we can break them. And I don't know. I don't think that'll go well for him.
All right. Well, I'm going to rely on some stats that I found to make my prediction here, Hillbilly. So, first off, the Celtics, they played the Mavericks. You said they had a losing record against the top 3 teams in the West, the Timberwolves, Nuggets, Thunder. But they did sweep the Mavericks in those 2 games. They beat them by 28 points on March 1st, and then by 9 points in January. Dallas scored 110 points in both those games, by the way. I thought that was pretty interesting. Those were high-scoring games, though.
They were, and one of them was before the trade deadline. And then the second one was at the end of a long Eastern road trip. It was the last game on that road trip.
Excuses. Okay.
And I think it may have even been the second night of a back-to-back. I think it was really close. But I'm just saying, it's not the same Dallas team.
Boston has won 4 straight against Dallas. They last lost to them March 13th, 2022. But in the last 10 years, only 2 teams have won the championship while finishing the regular season outside the top 5 in offensive efficiency. We had the Warriors 2 years ago, the Lakers in the bubble 4 years ago. And in the same time period, the last 10 years, only 2 teams have also won the championship with a defense that was outside the top 10. The Nuggets last year and the Warriors in 2018. Boston is top 5 in offense, top 10 in defense. Dallas is in neither. Of course, that doesn't disqualify Dallas because other teams have done that without being in those qualifiers. There is one statistic, though, that's a pretty good indicator of discovering a championship, and that is having a net rating that is historically good of at least 11.0. Net rating, if you don't know, is the offensive efficiency rating minus the defensive efficiency rating. So of the 6 teams all time that have recorded a net rating of at least 11.0, only one of those failed to win an NBA championship. That was the Spurs in 2016. I think we forget 2016, the Spurs were also incredible. They just had to face the 72-win Warriors, and then the 72-win Warriors had to face LeBron in the finals. The Spurs were amazing that year too, but they are the only team who has not won a championship with a net rating of at least 11, and the Warriors had a net rating of 10.7 that year. The Celtics net rating this year is 11.6, which is tied with the Warriors in 2017. They won the title, and it's behind only the Bulls in 1996 and 1997. They won the championship in both of those years with a man that Hillbilly just mentioned, actually, Michael Jordan. But perhaps an even better indicator is a team that has won at least 75 games through the regular season and the first 3 rounds of the playoffs while losing less than 20 games. Only 9 teams have done that previously. You can probably guess the only one that didn't win the championship was the Warriors in 2016. So after all that, Hillbilly, I read something in ESPN. Jason Tatum said this is his second shot because 2 years ago they went to the finals, and as we said, they were burnt out. They were done. They just couldn't do it. This year, they're going to get it done. I've got the Boston Celtics winning this series, just like you. I think it's going to go 7 games, but I think they're going to win the finals for the 18th time, which would break the tie with the Lakers for most all time, and I've got Jason Tatum as my finals MVP. But I'm expecting a pretty good series, and I would not be surprised if Dallas won, like I would have been surprised, like both of us would have been surprised, I think, last year if Miami had won that series.
Yes, I think so. The last few years, the finals were. This is a trickier finals to pick than last year and the year before that, where it was, like we said, with Boston and Golden State before, it seemed like a foregone conclusion.
Well, 3 years ago for you, I mean, that was easy. Milwaukee, I mean, come on.
Well, right.
Crazy.
Actually, yeah, I did pick them that year, but yeah, there was some lingering doubt though.
So, but if the Mavericks do manage to win the series, it would be their second title in franchise history. They would join the Bucks, the Knicks, and the Rockets, who also have 2 championships. But in game one is Thursday. I've got Boston because under Jason Kidd, the Mavericks have lost 5 of their 6 series openers. They didn't lose the last one, but 5 of their 6. So I've got Boston in game 1. And in the series, this is probably the first time in a couple of years that our finals preview we've had differing predictions. So we'll see whose facts turn out to be correct.
It's gonna be a lot of fun to watch it. I mean, as the rest that's Boston's had and the easy schedule, is that going to hurt them or harm them? Because I think you could also see it where Dallas they're already ramped up to such a high level of play because of the competition. I think Boston's going to have to catch up with them. That's why I think Dallas will take the first game.
Yeah, no, I did see that. Like, you would think that if a team got 9 days of rest, they'd be well prepared. But historically, that hasn't always happened. It's kind of, I think it was like even the number of times that a team came out rusty or they came out hot when they had like a week plus of rest. And
Right.
Dallas has had 6 days of rest too. Like,
Yeah, they've had
they're not
plenty.
just coming off of it. Yeah.
And that's important too, because Luka has been beat up in the playoffs. I mean, his knee is, if you see him in the post-game interviews, his knee is bleeding every night. I don't understand why that's happening. Like what kind of knee injury he has where blood comes out
Wow.
every night. But I don't know if you noticed that, but he's always got the bandage on it and it's always bleeding through. I think it's going to make a big difference with him getting that rest.
All right. So as we said, the finals start on Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. All the games are on ABC this year. Sunday is game 2, Wednesday game 3, so on, so forth, until game 7, which would be, if necessary, Sunday, June 23rd. And then that leads into the NBA draft, Hillbilly's favorite Wednesday of the year, 8 p.m. Eastern on ABC and ESPN. And then free agency. Well, actually, everybody's excited for the draft, Hillbilly, because we all want to see where Bronny's going to go, LeBron James Jr.
And then maybe see where LeBron goes to follow him. Maybe.
That is true. Well, we will see. All right, so for the millionth time on this podcast, we love him, though. Our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly. Hillbilly, once again, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Zander's Facts.
A big thank you once again to our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly, for coming on the podcast. The weeks where Hillbilly comes on the podcast, and I told him this off the air, but it makes my life easier, so I really appreciate him coming on the podcast, laying out all the facts for you, even if, some of his facts, like, he did pick the Nuggets to win the finals in the playoff preview, which, the Nuggets aren't in the series. I picked the Celtics. Celtics are still there, so, he might not have all the facts, but he does have a lot of facts, so we, of course, appreciate him coming on the podcast. And thank you all for listening to the return of the Zander's Facts podcast. This was episode 138. Those are all the facts I have for you this week. A reminder before we go that if you liked all the facts on this week's podcast, please make sure to follow this podcast on your podcasting app wherever you're listening to this podcast. Download this episode to your device. It helps us out. That's the number I see. I can't see if you listen. I can only see if you download. So you can download and not listen. I honestly don't care. If you just download it, I really appreciate it. Make sure to also to rate and review the podcast. Check us out on every social media thing in existence. And also make sure to check out the links below on this episode's description. We've got one for Zander's Weekend Facts, which is the newsletter that comes out every Sunday morning. It is a recap of the week's top headlines that I write. It is free to sign up to get it in your email inbox every Sunday morning. You should go do that at the link below. Also, check out our YouTube channel because all our new episodes, including this one, get posted to our YouTube channel with a nice background you can watch. And the Zander's Facts link tree, it has every single Zander's Facts link that you could ever want. That is the Zander's Facts link tree, and it is also linked in this episode's description. This was episode 138 of the podcast. Again, for our return from our little hiatus, thank you all so much for listening, y'all. I hopefully am going to have a little bit more of an update on the future of the podcast next week. I have talked about in previous podcasts, we'll be back in 2 weeks or whatever, and I've lied. But next week, we are certainly going to have a podcast because I've got another guest that I am bringing back to the podcast. Our Zander's Facts soccer guru, Emma Adams, is back on the podcast next week because if y'all don't know, the summer of soccer is just about to start. It is going to be a massive summer for soccer. We've got 2 major tournaments that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. First, we've got the European Championships, also known as the Euros, which are taking place in Germany. 32 of the top European nations are competing for Europe's top prize. And also, in this country, the United States, we've got the Copa America tournament with North America and South America countries, including our very own U.S. men's national team, who are going to be battling it out. And it's going to be some good stuff to watch. So we're going to preview those 2 big tournaments next week on episode 139 of the Zander's Facts podcast. But that is it, y'all. That is a wrap on this week's edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you all with episode 139 next week.
We are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat.